Rallies filled malls and parks in Hong Kong on Monday, while Disneyland employees staged a strike. Even government workers joined the protest actions, crippling the operation of several offices. Tourists were upset.
We cannot get entrance to the Causeway Bay because everything they block, right?
On Monday afternoon, the police tear gassed protesters on Harcourt Road. Rallies poured water on tear gas canisters and shielded themselves with umbrellas. Hours later, a Hong Kong police station was vandalized, a fire blazing just outside the facility. Masked black-clad men attacked in North Point, targeting those wearing white and houses of known protest leaders. The authorities said the men in black were not from their ranks. Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam meanwhile warns about what may happen if the protest actions continue.
But we continue to allow these violent protesters to make use of the Fugitive Offenders Bill and these demands to conceal their ulterior motives. That is going to push Hong Kong to the verge of a very dangerous situation.
Hong Kong police has arrested more than 400 since the protest actions against the extradition bill in March. Among those arrested is a Filipino, but he says it was just a case of mistaken identity. The arrest of a Filipino brought fear among OFWs in Hong Kong.
The thing is, the police has a tactic. It's like, it's really basically meant to arrest people, not to disperse the crowd. So what happened is that when the anti-riot moved in on the protesters ran away, and unfortunately, this Filipino guy was there, as a passerby.
The Department of Labor and Employment is still studying whether to implement a temporary deployment ban to Hong Kong as tensions escalate. For now, Filipinos are advised to stay out of areas where protest actions are being held.
The president will always be concerned when the safety of our countrymen is at stake.
For News 5, Dale De Vera, we are One News.
To tell us more about the situation in Hong Kong, we have on the phone Associated Press correspondent Yanan Wang. Yanan, we're closely watching, and not just because there are hundreds of thousands of Filipinos in Hong Kong, but clarify for us the different police, peacekeeping, military forces already deployed. We're looking at the report specifically about movement outside Hong Kong, just at the border. Are PLA forces already on the ground or still outside Hong Kong?
At the moment, there have been no military forces that have been deployed to deal with the demonstrations. What we have seen so far, as your correspondent described, is just riot police using primarily tear gas and rubber bullets to disperse crowds. As for reports about whether the People's Liberation Army will move in, there is a provision in Hong Kong law called the Garrison Law. There's one article in that allows the Hong Kong garrison, which has already been stationed in Hong Kong, those are PLA troops already stationed in Hong Kong. They may step in to help with the maintenance of public order and disaster relief if called upon by the Hong Kong government, but that is not something we've seen so far.
Okay, in the meantime, Hong Kong does have many resident foreigners and expats here in Manila. Government is considering a suspension in deployment of Filipino workers in Hong Kong. What is the official advisory to foreigners by the Hong Kong authorities?
We're not aware of any advisory that has been sent out to foreigners in Hong Kong. I think similar to the Philippines, there have been other countries that have issued travel warnings or travel advisories to their citizens just to warn them to be wary about the situation, particularly after civilians were attacked on a commuter rail station.
Okay, let's get to what's happening now. What's been the impact on the Hong Kong economy so far? And what exactly is the end game for the protesters at this point?
As for the impact on the Hong Kong economy, both the Hong Kong government and the central government today have pointed to several indicators, including tourism and investor confidence, to say that the protesters are negatively affecting the Hong Kong economy and even contributing to a significant downward pressure in terms of the economic growth. However, some protesters who held a press conference today sort of refuted that and said that those trends have been existent even before the protest started. So they say that it's not fair or accurate to make a direct connection between the protests and those numbers. As for the end game for the protesters, they have 5 major demands, and they include what they call universal suffrage, which is direct voting, as well as an independent inquiry into what they call police's abuses of power, and the withdrawal of the extradition legislation, which is what sparked all of these mass demonstrations over the last 2 months.
We've been watching the protests over the past weeks, obviously. Are the protesters still essentially the same wide demographic represented at the start of the demonstrations with that the mass of people that people saw? Or is this now a narrower sector of youth activists? Is there any change in the character of the people out in the streets?
I think there has always been a pattern, and maybe it's become more distinct now, in that the rallies will begin sometime in the afternoon, generally on the weekend, and the people who attend the rallies at the very beginning include a wide swath of the population, and they're of all ages, including middle-aged people and retirees, and of course young people. But then after nightfall and after the police pre-approved designated routes and times for the ending of the protest, then that's when we see predominantly young activists who might be more extreme and they're the ones who are doing some of the things that the government is condemning, like surrounding police stations or vandalizing public property.
Okay, let's look at the end game on the other side of this. China says it is being pushed to a dangerous situation. Those are their words. Does Beijing have face-saving options to take a step back and accommodate some demands, let's say, to diffuse tensions? Or do they now have limited options and just go all in on a crackdown?
It's very difficult right now to say how China is going to react if and when it makes a concrete move to intervene. So today there was a press conference with spokespeople from the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office, and they gave no indication of making any concessions or opening up channels to communicate with the protesters. Instead, they talked about how there have been some violent acts and a few radical protesters who are intent on bringing chaos and ruin to Hong Kong, as well as foreign forces who have been encouraging the whole thing, according to the central government. Whether they will have a crackdown is still unclear. As for the Hong Kong government, they have already been arresting people in droves. They just said today that they have arrested more than 500 people, mostly on charges like unlawful assembly, because any public gathering of this kind that isn't approved by the police or that continues beyond the police approval permits for times and routes can be considered an unlawful assembly. The most serious charges that have been laid so far are rioting charges against 44 people, which is an offense that carries a maximum penalty of 10 years in jail.
Okay, thank you, Yanan. That was Yanan Wang of the Associated Press reporting live from Hong Kong.